I'm Chrissie Cochrane, commonly known as Chrissie Cochrane, for want of a better term. I was born in New Zealand in 1944, came over to the UK in '55, started playing music in pubs on acoustic piano at the age of, 16 as it happens, in London. So I came down to London from being at the Royal Normal College, great name for anywhere. Came down to London, got a job at the RNIB and played music on the side. My mother had German measles, which could either leave you blind, brain damaged or deaf. And I suspect it's left me blind and brain damaged personally, but no, who knows? It's left me blind, that's for sure. The optic nerve is, if you imagine a bundle of wires, there's about one left. The optic nerve is hanging by a thread. It could go at any time. I learnt Braille in New Zealand from the age of about 4. Learnt grade 1, grade 2, and then because I was doing shorthand and typing at the London Arts Board, I also learnt Braille shorthand before that at the Royal Normal College. So I knew Braille up to that degree, to 120 words a minute shorthand. I've never used Braille music. I don't like the system. I think it's clumsy and cumbersome. I think it could be devised better. Don't ask me how, but I think it could. It's a legacy of the past that's, I believe, originates in Germany, and I don't think it's a particularly good system. And there's no way you can sight read it. Of course there isn't. Totally, I learnt music totally by ear. I'm a good mimic and a good picker-upper of tunes and things. And I'm also lucky that I've got perfect pitch, which can be a pain in the what's-it sometimes if a keyboard or something or a piano is out of pitch. You desperately want it to be right, but it also gives me the ability to put chords behind melodies I just hear in my head. I worked with small bands doing then sort of restaurants and the hotel circuit. Got involved in electric music, I suppose one could call it by then, as opposed to electronic. Initially we went through various agencies. Let's see, there was Clayman's agency, and this was sort of a pub work. They basically relied on what the publican said. If the publican liked you, you got the job the next week or whatever. They very rarely came to hear you, and they very rarely auditioned. There were a couple, Geraldo agency, which was a bit bigger, they did audition, and the hotel circuit and that, we got through an agency called Enterprol, if I remember rightly, which is a strange name, but they kept giving us work because people seemed to like what we did. We had a band uniform, which was the easiest way to call it. It was nothing spectacular, a white shirt and a little waistcoat thing and that. So there was no problem there. I kept my hair in reasonable shape at the time. I then heard of these wonderful things called synthesizers. I thought, could I have one? Must get one. And the VCS3 was small enough, it was suitcase size. So what I did was I put it on a snare drum stand, and there it sat to my left-hand side at an angle so I could get at the various controls. Managed to get hold of the portable Hammond organ. There weren't many of them made, but it made carting gear about much easier. I was still doing basically the sort of hotels and restaurant circuit, so it was basically anything from standards to pop to dance music, basically whatever they wanted, within reason. Cover versions, very little original material, because they don't want that. They want to hear it sounding vaguely like the record they know and love. days, if you were just playing piano or something, you took the tube, and you pretty quickly learnt the tube routes. So that wasn't too much of a problem. We did, as I said before, we had problems sometimes getting out of London with traffic and that. You finish a day job at, say, 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and you've got a gig to do at 7:30 just outside London, and you've got to set up equipment. That can be a bit airy, to say the least. And then, what did I get then? Fender Rhodes. Yes, I decided that the Hammond was just too much to cart about. We had Mark Busicki from Big Country on drums, just gigging when he wasn't otherwise working. Me on Fender Rhodes, and John Land, who was an unusual gentleman in that he was a good vocalist, but his prime instrument was the recorder, of all things. I didn't find being visually impaired a particular obstacle, simply because I wasn't running these bands. I may have been the engine room of it, if you like, playing keyboards and bass pedals, but someone else was running them, and they got the jobs. So that wasn't a problem. What could be a problem occasionally was when you got to places, getting into them and carting equipment round and stumbling over things. But in terms of getting the work, no, you didn't, as a visually impaired person, have any problems. Now, I might have done had I been getting that sort of work on my own, but I don't know. We were also terribly lucky because everyone thought, erroneously of course, that blind musicians were like Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder. Great. Oh, you're a blind musician, you've got to be good. Not true, but useful. Nowadays, there aren't the blind musicians at the top of the tree like that there used to be. I can't even think of one now that's not an older blind person. I can't think of a young person, I'm afraid. And that's sad. I would recommend get very au fait with digital technology. Make stuff at home. The one thing that has increased now is the ability to do very high quality professional recordings in your own home. Get them out there, get them onto your Google Plays, your Spotifys, your iTunes, and it's not that difficult to do that. There are organisations that will do it for you, or you can do it yourself, which is much more difficult. But in terms of live work, just find people you like to play with. You see, in our day, there were many, many more opportunities, even at the lower end of the music, pianos in pubs and things like that, where someone might come in and hear you. I remember a guy coming into a pub I was playing at, and he came up to me and he said, "Here, would you like to have a go on the Leicester Square Theatre organ on a Saturday morning?" I said, "Yes, please." And it's that sort of opportunity that you grab. And I don't think now there are the opportunities for blind people. And I think also the education system hasn't done us any good at all, because it teaches us to be grateful for what you get and not to demand. I don't mean it in a vicious way, but stand up for what you want. You are disabled whether you like it or not. Now, you know, I think you do have to get on and deal with it. I don't think things are as accessible as perhaps they should be, but I think they're getting there. There is a new system come out recently by a company called Native Instruments called Complete Control, which voice synthesizes everything. You have a keyboard with control surface, and it's all done by the computer. The problem it has is it takes a while to load, but nevertheless, everything is spoken for you. And this is the first time that anyone's bothered to bring out a complete system. Now, I have 2 Yamaha workstations in the studio here, and none of those speak. I've had to learn where things are. But unfortunately, as a lot of it is screen-based, I can't, for example, use the hard disk recording system on them because it's all screen-based. So I then feed everything into a computer and do it on the computer, which has screen reading software. But no digital, yes please, bring it on. This gigging business is all very well, but it was taking a toll because I was doing a day job at the same time. I was working for the London Arts Board. I thought, right, I'll get a residency. So I managed to get a residency at a little restaurant in Earl's Court called the Tower of Pisa. And I then got a gig which I kept for 12 years or so at Entrecôte in Southampton Row. This was interesting. I started off there with a trio, a guy on vocals, a drummer and myself, and I wound up with just me. So I got hold of a Roland vocoder, which you put the instrument in one side, your voice in the other, and the instrument comes out saying what your voice says. So I used that for harmony with 2 microphones. Basically, if you can imagine, there's your mic that you're listening to, singing into, there's your mic for your vocoder. So you've got 2 mics on one stand. And I did that for ages and ages. I was working for the London Arts Board, and they changed their computer system, which was no good for me. Awfully sorry, you can't use it. It's not accessible. So I thought, what am I going to do? Well, fortunately, a friend of mine had been working for the American Council of the Blind in their radio station. He'd been managing it, and he had decided he'd had enough of this, and he said, would you like the job? I said, well, does it pay? He said, well, yeah. I said, I'll tell you what, let me see if I could get a year away from the Arts Council, because after all, they were obliged, really, to give me something because the flipping system becoming inaccessible. So they said, yes, go away and do it. So I started working from home, managing their radio station. I got several trips to the States because of that, to Minnesota, to Florida, and to Louisville, Kentucky. Then I started up my own station, the Global Voice, which is where I am now. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Voices with me, Chrissie Cochrane, here in the sumptuous Global Voices studio in Putney, southwest London. I have never been able to sell me. And that's one thing that blind people, or some blind people, there are exceptions, of course, but a lot of blind people have this problem. It's difficult for them to sell themselves because they're not taught how to do it, and they don't see people doing that very sort of thing on videos and on everyday television and what have you. The whole thing comes down to confidence. If you don't teach them to have confidence in what they're doing, then it's going to come over wooden. It should be taught in blind schools. It should be it should be a major thing that is taught. They should be taught to go out on their own, go to the local shops. I know several blind people who stay at home and don't know where their local shops are, for goodness sake. And their mother brings them their food every fortnight or so and sticks it in the freezer. And I say, well, what happens when your mother's dead, or when your parents have died? What are you going to do? I don't know. My view, for what it's worth, is that we have now got to a stage, unfortunately, where computer-generated music can be done in a studio without much talent, and image is everything. It would bother me if I was 30 or 40, or 20 even. The fact that no matter how good you are, that doesn't matter if they don't like the image. I would encourage other blind people to get into things like internet radio. And funnily enough, when I said I was going to start a radio station, I was extremely fortunate that most of the staff came with me. They seemed to like the way I ran things, which is rather nice. So I started off with a staff of about 20 or so who already knew how to do radio. So it was a question of setting it up. Whereas I am tolerably technically minded, I'm not technically minded enough to set up a station, so I got someone to do that for me to the spec that I wanted, which we had, and away we went. But basically I have everything on the computer, all the music and stuff is on the computer. I have a small mixing desk, I don't need a large one for what we're doing, and a half-decent microphone. And if you know what you're doing, you're in business. Thank you very much for being on Voices this month. This has been Voices. I am Chrissie Cochrane. I am another poor guinea pig in the hot seat, same time next month. Till then, good listening on the Global Voice. Stay tuned and take care of each other. I'm out of here.